as I mentioned earlier, this is part of a larger effort to update Roswell's comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is updated every 5 years. It's required by the Georgia Department of Community Affairs for the city to retain its qualified local government and its plan first status. And that's important because a lot of the city's legal ability to zone and receive different grants and funding and things of that nature are really tied to those statuses. Um, we we meet that criteria by meeting the minimum planning standards that are set by the Department of Community Affairs. In Roswell, we seek and I think we've been successful in exceeding those standards. So we use this as an opportunity not just to check the box and update the plan as we need to, but also really to understand, constantly be thinking about how the city's conditions are changing. Use it as an opportunity to learn from the residents, the businesses, and various leaders in the community what their vision for the future is, and make sure that we use the plan as a tool to ensure that future changes are guided by that community vision. And then finally, it's also an opportunity to make sure that we're coordinating the work in Roswell with the cities and counties that surround us, with our neighbors. Planning work is never done in a vacuum. What happens in Alpharetta affects Roswell. What happens in Roswell affects Alpharetta. So we want to be cognizant of those types of things. We have a process that takes us out to October 2021, which is when we believe the plan will be adopted. There's sort of a 5-phase process to this: a research phase, a vision phase, a develop phase, a document, and then that adoption phase. And we're right kind of in the middle of where the bulk of the work is. We've done a lot of research. We've done some visioning, and these exercises today are part of that visioning also. And really, this helps set the stage for us into moving into that third phase where we start to develop the actual plan itself. So like I said, as part of that, we are taking some deeper dives into specific areas. So today, again, we're looking at these 2 nodes, but next Thursday, we'll also be looking at the area just east of 400 around Old Alabama Road. So if you're interested in that and you haven't signed up yet, we absolutely encourage you to do so. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the context of this. At all 3 of these locations, we're really talking about redevelopment. These are sites and locations that already have a lot of development. So if we're thinking about what they may be in the future, it's inherent that we're talking about redevelopment. And redevelopment is not as easy as one might presume. I'm sure everyone has passed by that vacant shopping center and can't really quite understand why. Why can't they just turn that into something nicer? Well, it's because it's more complicated than just throwing some money at it. To the degree there are existing leases and tenants in place, that really makes change difficult. If a property owner is considering redevelopment, there's no revenue during that period, no revenue from rent. It requires a lot of capital and debt to go ahead and redevelop, and a lot of complicated financing also. And fundamentally, it's taking on risk. So many property owners are not experienced or comfortable with the business of redevelopment. And these 2 images that you see here on the right, cash flow before redevelopment and cash flow after redevelopment, it shows you that in many cases, a property owner could go ahead with redevelopment, but their net income may be the same. They may be bringing more gross income, but after they pay off all the additional expenses that they've taken on as a result of that redevelopment, their net income may be effectively the same. So, it's basically, for a lot of property owners, it's a high risk, low reward situation. The exception to that on the next slide is the rule of 3. And this is really the idea that, if you're looking at a property, if you can redevelop it to be more valuable, 3 times or more of the purchase cost or the inherent cost, that starts to become a scenario in which redevelopment becomes more attractive. So, outside of that, unless revenue is falling below the operating cost of a shopping center or an apartment complex or whatever it might be, or if the revenue potential, such as in this rule of 3 type of scenario, isn't in place, redevelopment is very unlikely to occur. So I say all this just to provide the context for when we're talking about redevelopment. We're talking about something that is, it's difficult, And because of the value perspective that tends to get involved in these situations, if we're replacing a shopping center, we're not likely to replace it with just another shopping center of the same type of intensity. There's a lot of need for the redeveloper, for the property owner, to get increased value out of it to justify their cost. So the context to all that then is that really what we're here to do today is lay out some visions for these nodes and understand how we can potentially resolve sort of the challenges between the redevelopment piece and then also what you as the community would like to see at these locations, and find where, hopefully there's some happy medium. And really, as it relates to the comp plan is use that vision to then figure out how we can roll back up to the comp plan and provide guidance for how these sites could potentially redevelop. So all this is about vision. It's not about the work and plans that we put together today. I don't want anyone to walk away with the expectation that that's what's going to happen at these locations. That's not what the purpose of this exercise is. The purpose of this exercise is to think about what could be there, so that if a developer were to come along, we have this as a guide that we can provide to say this is something that we believe could work. So on the next slide, we're going to use a tool called Pigeonhole. Some of you have done some exercises with us already. You're pretty familiar with it. But this is a separate tool. We're going to be doing some live polling to go through some of the exercises today. So this is really just a great way to hear from a lot of people without everyone having to talk over each other. So we'll ask everyone to go to pigeonhole.at and enter the passcode plan 2040, or you could just use this QR code that you see here. If you have a phone or another device handy, that's probably the easiest way to do this, but you can certainly do this at a desktop as well. So I'll give everyone a moment to sign on, because we'll be going through a series of questions through this application. Again, it's www.pigeonhole.at, and the passcode is plan 2040. And we'll just stop here for a moment to give everyone the opportunity to sign up. All right, let's move forward. Is anyone having any trouble signing up? Okay, well let's move forward then. All right, so let's talk at least first initially about just mobility, and we're going to focus again on 9 and Holcomb Bridge Road. So there's a few things going on from a mobility standpoint in the existing conditions. Obviously, this node is defined by 2 very large highways, Holcomb Bridge Road and State Road 9. They're both state routes. They're both state maintained. So the city has influence to a certain degree, but they're not. The city is not necessarily in a position to make decisions about what actually happens specifically on those 2 roadways. So we have wide highways. We do have pretty good pedestrian coverage. Some good sidewalk coverage and crosswalks. MARTA comes through here with a couple of routes. And we also have a lot of interesting side streets. We have Commerce Parkway, we have Old Roswell Road, Howes Road comes in. So there's lots of little things going on from a transportation standpoint right here at this node. Next slide. One thing that we want to be cognizant of is other plans and other thoughts the city has had for the community and for this area specifically. So last year, the city prepared a bicycle and pedestrian master plan, and there were some ideas of sidewalk and coverage and a multi-use path, as you can see here on this map for that area. Also, a few years ago, there was a larger comprehensive transportation plan for the entire North Fulton area. And that also relates to the Atlanta Regional Commission, which provides a lot of funding for projects. And those 2 black lines, or dashed black lines, are 2 projects that come out of that effort. An extension of Mansell Road, where it would come all the way down and loop back into State Route 9. And then also an extension of Commerce Parkway, where it would extend past Old Roswell Road and into Holcomb Bridge Road. And we always want to think about safety also when we're looking at things like this, and in particular, pedestrian safety. There's high sidewalk coverage, like I said earlier, but some of it is disconnected. We're fortunate that we don't see a tremendous amount of crashes involving pedestrians here. And that's not quite the case at some of these other locations that we'll be looking at. And then, like I mentioned, there's also transit connections with MARTA bus routes 85 and 185. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about land use.
All right, thanks, Eric. So the main character area at this node is the Highway 9 Alpharetta Highway character area, and it calls for mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly corridor and activity center with the flexibility of new and enhanced uses for some of the existing big box development, and looking at adaptive mixed use and commercial infill. And again, this is from the previous comprehensive plan, and this really sets a vision for what the community wants to see in the future. In terms of zoning, that is what controls the use, current uses. And so again, for the most part, this area zoning is commercial mixed use to reflect what the community would like to see in the future. We've got a little bit of the office park and then some of the civic and institutional use. But for the most part, again, this is zoned for commercial mixed use type development. For the existing conditions, you've got a large shopping center here with the old with the Cineplex, with the theater. You've got some office parks mixed in, a lot of the out parcel commercial, and some of the retail here with the Kroger, and then you've got the strip commercial. So there's a lot, mainly commercial uses here now. You've also got, again, some more office parks, the big box commercial, some fast food. And then there's an updated shopping center where the Marshalls is. And then you've also got this very large vacant parking that is shown here in panoramic view. And that's a lot of underutilized space that could be put to potentially a better use. So through the social pinpoint map survey that hopefully you are all able to participate in as far as the virtual public meeting, we heard that the community really does prefer change in the area. That's what the red indicated on that mapping exercise, was to indicate that you'd like to see change in a particular area. And so we see a lot of red here. And so that speaks to the fact that the community wants to see this area used differently. So our first question for Pigeonhole, and again, if you've lost the address, it's up here at the top, the pigeonhole.at, and then plan 2040 is the passcode. Do you agree with the broader community input that this area is in need of change? So we'd really like it if you've been able to, if you can get in the Pigeonhole, we'd like to hear your feedback on this. So the options are strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. So we'll give everybody a minute to participate in the poll. Looks like we've got 10 votes so far. But it does, it looks like that we do have pretty strong agreement. 70% of the folks who participated, that they would like to, they agree with the broader input that this area is in need of change. We also had another exercise as part of the public input called Community Scale. And that was asking, looking at some of the particular areas around Roswell, what is the appropriate scale? So if you'd like to see change in a particular area, what's the type of scale of development that you'd like to see there as part of that change? And it goes all the way from the ex-urban, low intensity to suburban, to town center, and then more of the urban development with, potentially some more high-rise, taller buildings, offices, potentially residential, things of that nature. When we looked at the results of the community scale on Social Pinpoint, most people saw this area as a town center. That would be the appropriate type of development. So a little more intensity than you would see in the suburbs, and that implies, a mix of uses as well. So our next question, do you agree that town center is an appropriate community scale for this area? So we'll give everybody a minute to participate. Okay, well, it looks like we do have agreement from this group that town center would be an appropriate community scale for this particular area. And the final question, what types of land uses and development features would you like to see at this location? So we've got a pretty broad array of uses, from retail and office and entertainment and restaurants, and please, I think you can choose as many as you want. So, please feel free to indicate as many of these as you would like to see from the residential side, as well as more of the commercial and office uses. Okay, it seems like everybody is done voting. So thank you all for participating. It looks like, continuing continuing to see some of the retail, restaurants, entertainment options that are there, as well as potentially adding some green space to the mix, and then also adding in some various types of residential to the mix seems to be supported as well. So thank you all for participating in that poll. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Core, who's going to talk about placemaking.
Hey everybody, it's good to be here with you all today, and I think this is an exciting opportunity to rethink this area. What we've done today is look at a couple different options, how you might rethink this character area. So we're going to show those to you, and then we're going to go through a couple of image preference concepts for you guys to vote again. So you'll be able to have an opportunity to continue to vote. So with that in mind, if you go to the next slide, Lauren, a couple of things that you're all very aware of that are consistent with this area that pop out. First off, there's a number of different gateway features, different elements that define the edge of the road and edge of property boundaries throughout the area. You have really an existing entertainment district with mini golf and other movie theaters and those things there. But you also have a large amount of vacant parking that coincides with that, which is kind of a traditional build out of those areas. And so you either have it very packed or very vacant, and it flexes a lot of times. You also have a historic cemetery back there. That is something that You want to preserve and make sure that's preserved properly, and that people can have access to it, but it also provides an opportunity to tell a good story, and can be built successfully into the development. And also you have some open green space and areas with open green space. So different areas to think about. When we think about, if we go to the next slide, thinking about how we, some of the opportunities and constraints, Eric touched on several of these. We have a major intersection node in the middle of the corridor. So that's something we have to acknowledge and recognize. Two major state routes. How do we work with that and address that? Very wide roadways. So when we're thinking about this character area, our goal is how do we make sure we can better connect both sides of the corridor. You have House Road that has a very unique movement, I would say, and design. It kind of drops people in there. But you also have some potential bike ped connections through the corridor. You have obviously some open space opportunities. You already have an existing cemetery. And so the idea is really trying to figure out how you better utilize, or how can we encourage better utilizing existing parking lot areas and building footprints and layouts. So some of the uses are very well used. People like them, but how can we make them, how can we work with them better? So the developers can see a higher return on investment. And as you mentioned, you can see more retail, more office, more entertainment areas, and have more of those opportunities. So next slide. So we kind of caveat this with two different approaches to looking at how you would address this character area in terms of redevelopment. One is retrofit and infill. You work with what you have existing, but you maximize, you create better uses of the space, and you work with those out parcels in those areas that are less than desirable, that don't provide good, strong corners and edges along the roadways, and begin filling them in and thinking about different ways to connect. As you see on the screen here, you've got some things happening to kind of promote that. I'd say one thing that is a big key is thinking about House Road and how it connects across the corridor on the backside of the property, as Lauren can show you there, and follows back along the mini golf course and connect. So connecting that across the corridor, and thinking about other connections and other interior connections. You already have some existing open space on the backside, kind of entertainment mini golf area, so maximizing that. But again, if you look at this space, what you'll see is you create a better street typology and hierarchy. Right now, there's major roads, there's not a lot of interconnectivity. So you really begin by defining that and making it improve mobility. So if it's easier to move around, if it makes sense and it's logical, then that reduces the number of trips people have to take and move and drive across the street. That's a big win. That improves traffic operations and kind of cleans the corridor in general. But also, you create connected park and pedestrian social gathering spaces. So as you fill in around, you make logical infill and development, whether it's, we say mixed use, kind of 1 to 3 stories intensity, but really matching what's there, not really kind of working with what is already existing in terms of the verticality of the buildings, but just filling it in and making a bit more sense of it. So, and there are a lot of precedents in Atlanta where that's happening, and oftentimes you'll see private developers and property owners wanting to do that because they still want to maximize. They're dealing with what Eric talked about at the beginning. How much do you invest, and where do you get to see the reinvestment? Retrofits and infills also allow you to keep a lot of restaurants and retail open, especially successful ones, as you redevelop, and that's important to keep in mind as how you think this might be, redeveloped over time. So next slide. Alternate B is a little different. We're really defining this as what does a new town center look like? Okay, so the first thing I'll tell you is you create a series of nodes along the corridor. There's key intersections that are really placemaking opportunities to really create an identity and a character. Holcomb Bridge and State Road 9, State Road 9 and House Road, further east as well. So all these different areas, you kind of begin saying conceptually, we want to define and demarcate this area to make it very clear that this is a very unique and special place and has an identity. You then begin looking at, building out a framework of, logical movement through the space. So I always tend to say that the streetscape and that public infrastructure, that becomes the groundwork framework else for what you're working on. And you build up from there. Then you begin identifying areas that are more intense uses and mixed uses around the major intersections, because that's with more visibility, and you stagger it and step it back as you work towards residential uses and more open space. So it's a natural transition from existing mature residential areas, existing land uses, and other parts and other commercial developments that aren't seeing redevelopment. So this, you have to be very sensitive of how you build this out. That makes a lot of sense. But again, as you consolidate uses, you introduce mixed use, it allows people to really rethink how their patterns and movement in this area. Next slide. So on the screen here, this is another opportunity for you to vote. And we're asking you here, we're going to ask you 3 different questions. The first one is development. You know, what does good development look like? What makes sense to you? What are you drawn to? So looking at these are a variety of different options. They're all different sizes and scales of development, but we want you to look at these and, you know, what draws your eye to you, right? And vote on what you are drawn to. You have certain areas that are 3 to 4 stories with ground level retail, like in item 2 or 7 or 8. You have number 4 is a great example of kind of a townhome development, but in a more urban feel. You have item 3, where it shows the image of the Aldi. That's really kind of lower, I'd say kind of a low intensity development, kind of more of the retrofit feel. It's 1 story, but it's designed in such a way that makes sense. You know, number 9 is the same way. It's really a retrofit of existing shopping mall. Whereas number 5 and 6 really create these village style feels. So I'll let you continue voting for just a second to kind of see where people land. We're getting a lot of movement now, which is great. So, you know, 6 and 5, which and 4 is linked to that kind of middle block. Okay. Generally speaking, these are kind of that village style, townhome, brownstone type area that's walkable, but feels comfortable at a human scale, where you can walk, you can park, you have access to good amenities, coffee shops, breweries, but you still have the opportunity to park. You still have real uses like laundromats, grocery stores, things that allow you to live, work, and play in the same location. So I think that's very clear there. Especially number 5, that feel. And that feel has character. If you look at that item, I'll say one thing that jumps out that people are really drawn to, I think a lot of times, is the good materials, materiality, and the fenestration of those buildings. That's what people are drawn to in a lot of ways. It's good design. So this is really great information and a lot of votes here. But I'd like to go to the next slide too to continue moving it. This is the second question you're going to have to ask about, which is open space. In this area, when you think of town center or even a retrofit, you're finding places to activate the space, both from, you know, for the retailers, but also for families. And so people can linger longer. And we know that if people linger longer and spend more time, they'll spend more money, places are more sustainable. So, you know, what jumps out to you that is really attractive? As you can see, as people vote here, we'll give it a moment. We'll kind of dissect some of the votes here in a second as you guys vote. And not surprisingly, especially number 6, you know, 5 and 6 are more closely linked to some degree. They are kind of characteristic of these kind of village settings where you have commercial retail, but at a very human scale. We have public gathering spaces, public art. It's family friendly. You obviously have a lot of others, and number 2 and 3 also indicative of that kind of more town center feel. But you also have to have places for younger children, right? I mean, so they're less drawn to the breweries than they are to the playgrounds. And so you want to be able to have it for the whole family. It's not just, what we always like to say is, do you create places for an 8 to 80 community friendly? If you're 8 years old or you're 80 years old? And how do you kind of think through that? And that goes to the park spaces as well. This is really helpful and really good information. So thank you. I'm going to go finally to the last image, the last questionnaire, which is streetscape. So we know streetscapes are our biggest public investment, right? We always want to design them and think about them well. And so, you know, streetscapes have direct linkages to economic success and placemaking. You know, do you have places where you can sit outside? Number one. Do you, or you know, and number two as well, do you have a roadway network that directly links, as number three, trees, parking, streetscapes so it's seamless? Even areas that even have curveless streets, shared streets that treat stormwater management differently, like number 3 or number 5 or even number 6. Areas like number 7, very urban areas. I say urban areas are areas that have a lot of people in them, wider sidewalks, tree grades, good vegetation, or even number 9, where you have maybe number 9, smaller sidewalks, but you feel very integrated, like the sidewalk and the street, that they blend together. So there's a lot of different feels here. And so you want to get your feel on that and your take on that. Well, as you can see, number 4, and they're all very evenly spaced. Let's be honest. But number 4, a little bit higher than others, and you can kind of see, you know, it's more. And number 6, I mean, number 4 especially is indicative of that kind of village feel that you all talked about earlier, and you voted on. And number 6 has a really good. I love number 6. It's got a great spacing to it, right? It's a very clear delineation of where the pedestrians live and work. You've got sufficient room outside of restaurants to have eating and dining. You have sufficient places for your bicycles. You have meaningful street trees. And so often we see that that's a failure, where we put street trees in and they die because they don't have adequate room to grow. But these are meaningful places to plant trees and help them do the function of making it a more pleasant space and address stormwater concerns and limit stress on infrastructure. So they have multiple purposes here. So this is really very helpful. So thank you. So with that, I'm going to, I think the next slide is back to you, Eric, as we think about that. Next character.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. We're working right on time. We're about halfway through, and we're going to shift now to talk about the 400 node. And we'll do a Q&A at the end also, so we can have some discussions about that other node if anyone would like as well. So we appreciate everyone's support and input in going through this, and we're basically going to go through the same exercises, slightly different for this next node. So on the next slide, we are going to ask everyone to use Pigeonhole again. We're going to have a different passcode, so we're going to ask you to exit out of your existing browser and basically open up a new one. Again, going to pigeonhole.at, and this time the password is going to be HBR400. So we'll give everyone a second to go ahead and do that. And if anyone's having any issues with that, you know, by all means, speak up, or you can use the chat box as well. All right, why don't we move on to the next slide? So we'll start talking just a little bit about the existing mobility. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about some of the features that are out there. So there's the pedestrian bridge on Old Holcomb Bridge Road. There's some decent sidewalk coverage. Lots of things going on. One thing that we certainly notice, and probably anyone who's has spent any time out there, are that even though this is really not an environment that is in a particularly along Holcomb Bridge Road itself is not really quote unquote pedestrian friendly. There's a lot of people walking around. Some of that is some of the demographics of the area. There are actually a relatively significant amount of households who actually don't have access to a vehicle in this area. So it's important that those people have an ability to get around safely. So it's good to see that there's some coverage, even though that it's despite the fact that it's not necessarily an environment that's very conducive to pedestrian travel. Next slide. So our existing conditions, like I said, there are some pedestrian connections right on Holcomb Bridge Road and on Old Holcomb Bridge Road. As you get back into some of these complexes and neighborhoods, you don't quite see that you don't see that connectivity as strongly. There are some crashes along pedestrian involved crashes along this stretch, which is unfortunate and speaks to some of the issues I just mentioned, where it's really not an environment that's very conducive to walking around, even though there's lots of people doing it. Some of that, we're really noticing, quite frankly, at the bus stops along Holcomb Bridge Road, and the access to transit. Next slide. And then we do have a handful of planned projects in this area. The biggest one being the Big Creek Parkway, which we show in that sort of red and dashed line coming. Yep, that the cursor's following right there. So that's a pretty game-changing project, giving people the ability to get across 400 here in Roswell without being on Holcomb Bridge Road. And that's something that we're expected to see construction on the next few years. There's also a lot of ideas and projects in that bicycle and pedestrian master plan that I mentioned earlier, particularly the idea of using Big Creek itself as a greenway location, which you can see through the orange line that's kind of bisecting the whole the whole node itself, and then some other connections that go along with that. Old Roswell Road is a major connection in that plan as well. There's a short little stretch there that you see in that sort of kind of neon blue color, almost a little bit green there as well. And that's a stretch where we would, I think we have existing sidewalk, and we would service bicycle travelers through the use of sharrows, which are stripe markings on the roadway itself, indicating that it's appropriate for bicycle use. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Lauren again to talk about land use at this node.
Thanks, Eric. So again, just reviewing the character areas in this area. So just to refresh your memory again, location-based vision and policy statement for the area to guide future development, planning, and zoning districts. And this particular study area lies within two different character areas. You've got the Georgia 400 Holcomb Bridge node here in sort of that inner ring, if you will. And then you've got the suburban residential established neighborhoods here in the blue that surrounds that node around 400. And so, the development steps down into that more residential suburban feel. So the Georgia 400, the Holcomb Bridge node calls for, again, a vibrant activity center. So you're right here at this major intersection with a large state route, heavily traveled, and then you've also got Holcomb Bridge Road, and allowing for a mix of uses and making this again sort of a place for people to come and enjoy at this large and very, very active node. Zoning, I got a little bit of a patchwork here of lots of different types of uses that are allowed per the current zoning, from the residential multifamily and townhomes, even a little bit of the agricultural here, which makes sense due to the location of Big Creek, and some parks and rec uses as well along the creek. So again, the zoning reflects the land uses to an extent, and it kind of steps down in intensity as you go back from Holcomb Bridge Road and 400. In terms of the existing conditions, just taking a look at that, these are, you've got multifamily apartments here, as well as some townhomes over here adjacent to 400. And then you've got your commercial here along the corners and along Holcomb Bridge Road. In terms of what we heard on the social pinpoint map survey for this area, in the southern portion of this area, again along Holcomb Bridge and right there at that major intersection, that is where the community felt that change is appropriate. And then as you step down and step back and go into that Big Creek area, people definitely wanted to see that preserved as an important natural and environmental area. Don't know what happened here. This is supposed to be showing the question, and so I can work on fixing that. But if you want to go into the Pigeonhole and go to pigeonhole.at and then put in the passcode HBR 400, you can participate, and it's just a question asking if you agree with what we heard from the larger public about the input on this area. So seeing change there at the node and preserving that Big Creek area towards the northern end. So we had this fixed, so we're not going to be able to see the results, and I apologize for that. Let me see if I can fix that.
Everyone will be able to see the results live within the Pigeonhole, though.
Yes, you're right. Yep.
So you will be able to see the results. And just to clarify, this question is the change in preserve poll if you're looking within Pigeonhole.
So I've opened it on my computer, but it does look like that. It's 77.8% of the people who are participating in the poll agree with a broader community input that the area closest to the node is in need of change, while the Big Creek and the areas to the north need to be preserved. So just sort of clarify it, or really just solidifying that input that we heard. Again, in terms of the community scale, when we asked on social pinpoint, you had, town center and urban development up here at the higher intensity level. And in that input, we did hear that there was a desire to see a mix of the town center and urban development in this area. Again, really probably focusing more around the intersection of 400 and Holcomb Bridge Road and preserving this area to the back to the north. So again, next question. Do you agree with the broader community input that the area closest to the node, I'm sorry, hold on, next question. Do you agree that the town center and the urban center are the appropriate scale for this? I'm trying to find it.
Okay, this is the community scale poll, and we apologize that for some reason the live voting isn't displaying on the screen as we intended. But everyone can see the voting relatively on the Pigeonhole app itself.
So we have 20% who strongly agree with that, and then the 70% who do agree, and then there's a small percentage, 10%, that disagree. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A session. But thanks everybody for participating. And then this final question, which yay, that's working. What types of land uses and development features would you like to see at this location? So it's asking the same types of uses as last time with the previous node.
And Lauren, there's a question in the chat box about, or a comment about somewhere between town and urban.
Oh, in the Zoom chat?
In the Zoom chat, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe see what we mean by that exactly.
Oh, okay. So someone has said somewhere in
between
town and urban. That was their comment. Okay.
Yeah, Denise Rauch.
Denise. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of broadly how we interpret that. I think when we get into the specifics of what this plan formation may look like, that's where we'll certainly look from guidance from you and others in the community of, do we have some elements of this that are a little bit more urban, and then some elements that are a little bit more, sort of town center oriented, or do we make the whole sort of location as the vision for the entire location to be kind of in the middle? I think that's where we need to understand a little bit better from everyone.
Okay, well, it looks like I think I don't see anything changing now. So, again, this reflects, just a mix of uses here in this area, particularly restaurants and green space. Got the largest percentage of the votes, and then retail and office and entertainment and civic uses. And so, again, I think that this helps to sort of confirm what we heard from the public, that this area is seen as could be a very active mixed use area. Okay. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for placemaking.
Thank you, Lauren. So go to the next slide. As I mentioned before, we have a similar approach to we did the previous character area. We're going to look at a couple different alternatives, and again go through an exercise of looking at imagery and kind of what makes sense, what connects. So again, the big item in the room, the major element here is really the Big Creek Greenway and the surrounding wetlands. And so that really very much defines this character area in terms of how you begin thinking about redevelopment options. It's such an amenity, and there's obviously a track record of success when I'm taking advantage of and preserving the Big Creek and building on the Greenway and building upon that. So we're taking advantage of that. We recognize there's other open spaces such as Liberty Square Park in the area as well. But if you go to the next slide, let's be honest, we have a major wall on the eastern side, right, that really defines the boundary. It's a strong wall. And you have this Big Creek Greenway that is also a major feature cutting through the northern part of the property. There is, as many of you are aware, there's a planned parkway and with bicycle and pedestrian amenities, they'll cross 400 and make that connection. So that's going to create a shift in how people, in mobility options here. And will help define, as I've talked about before, the footprint for the new development as well, but also the idea of future Big Creek Greenway connections and taking advantage of that, making that a real. So, and I think, frankly, when people come off the interstate, then there's a lost opportunity right now to make this a gateway opportunity. This is a strong connection. And Elizabeth in the chat mentioned Avalon. Well, Avalon has the same thing. It has a very strong visual presence along 400, and off of 400, so people know it. So I think it's good to keep that in mind. So if we'll go to the next slide. Again, we took a couple different options here. One is to retrofit and infill. And so you have this kind of traditional garden style apartment complex where it kind of fits in and around the areas to the at the northern end, opposite the Big Creek Greenway, you have a couple different areas, especially along 400, where it's very high topographically. It looks down into the Big Creek Greenway area, so you have a very strong vantage point. And so these could be areas where you have more single-family residential, in some ways almost kind of a conservation subdivision built around, I say subdivision, but built around taking advantage of the natural components of the land, but also providing really nice, attractive view sheds of the Greenway, which I think in capturing that. And opposite the other side, to the west of that, you have kind of maybe an opportunity, maybe it's a little more intense, maybe it's more brown home style, built around a central open space. But this area, on the other side of Big Creek, can also take advantage of looking in that area. These are largely residential uses built around open spaces. And as you come along on the western side of the character area, you have more commercial residential, but also maybe more office space along here, framing that corner, as we've talked about before, a strong edge, and then continuing down with mixed use. And then taking the gateway opportunity, right, and with the mixed use, really along that corridor and right at the intersection, right there. And then behind that, the interior space is really defined by central open space and green spaces, with kind of medium-use residential townhomes, but they have direct access across the other side of the parkway to mixed use and retail. So it's a blend of different things. It really honors the existing patterns in there, so the existing traffic patterns with the recognition of the new parkway, but kind of plays within those natural confines that we're trying to do. So I think that's good. And I think when we're dealing with naturalized areas and areas that we want to take advantage of, you can still have the brownstones, you can still have very nice residential, but you can design in such a way that it maximizes the green space, right? That it doesn't feel like it's on a grid and it's very rigid. But if you go to the next slide, we've given you a different alternative on this one, where we've flipped everything a little bit more. At the bottom of the screen, you're still going to see this, the parkway becomes a central roadway through much more of a kind of a gridded out town center type development. You have a strong, again, retail use at the intersection. You have a blend of commercial residential and stacks down to, kind of more townhome residential, maybe a, very walkable kind of village style like we talked about in the previous area, right? Okay, that kind of area, but it's really all linked with central open space that runs north and south. So even though you might have a different use, a different commercial area, they're all linked. To your west, you still maintain more kind of residential office space, but if you can imagine, even if they're in the office to the west, you can walk down and actually have access to retail goods and services, right? You can really truly make it live, work, play. So you're making sure you're attracting those types of opportunities. And then again, the same idea we talked about before, a little different format. You're taking advantage of the topography, especially up above, right there, yeah, where the cursor is, where Lauren has it, kind of above, looking down on the Greenway. And in some sense, what you're doing is you're making, in some ways, the front door being the Greenway versus focusing so much on 400 interchange. It's great to have a gateway. It's great to have that. Let's get people access to the amenity we also love and desire, which is the Big Creek. And then you're introducing, again, that conservation subdivision type. It's not such a grid. You're working with topography to really accentuate the views. So someone who may want to live out there in a single family, but still have reasonable access to restaurants and goods and services that you could walk to or take a trail to. So giving them a blend of options for how to live and for lifestyle options. So that's really the idea here between these two, slightly different footprints, but I'm looking forward to sharing and hearing from you all here momentarily about what types of ideas you like in terms of imagery. So if we go to the next slide, Lauren. So we have the same challenge with this one, with knowing the development patterns we're looking at. So I'll kind of describe them briefly as you vote. I'm sorry it's not working. You have some of them are similar to what we saw before. We have, at the top end, more traditional. Thank you, Lauren. Great retrofit there, Lauren Blazik. Thank you very much. You have everything kind of more that traditional village feel. And number two, it's very, very high-end residential, but in a much more compact setting. Number three is a much more kind of that modern office feel, green roof. But again, how do you attract those types of businesses that want to be there and have amenities near them? Four is very much traditional, like 4 and 2, and even playing off number 6 a little bit. 5 is an interesting concept, really introducing, do you have smaller loft style studio living, higher end residential, but for someone maybe who is single but wants to run a gallery below or have a coffee shop, but still very connected to the neighbors as part of the larger development. And then at the bottom you have more of the traditional connected townhome units, condo units, and you get really larger at the bottoms, right? Very much larger. And 9 is much more kind of like a 5 or a 1. So all different sorts, a lot of different ideas and opinions. Again, 5 and 6, people are drawn to that, and I can understand why. And 7, kind of 5, 6, 7, 3, they all have really good amenities. They all have really good bones. And again, I go back to the idea, when you look at this development, I think what you're drawn to, everyone has their own opinions, but you're drawn to materiality, relationship of buildings to streets, spacing of those buildings, and it's the finer details that make those places special. And that's really what we want to articulate, especially in the comprehensive plan. The details matter, especially when you think about these areas and you're redeveloping them. So Lauren, if we can go to the second question, open space and parks. Lauren's going to bring out, now these are very different, because last time we didn't have a stream in the last one. Now we've got the Big Creek Greenway. We've got wetland areas. We have direct access to nature, which is a really strong selling point for people who want to live here. But we also have opportunities for open space and for linear, like in number 9, I'd say it's kind of a linear park feel that is very drawn to people. Still places for all ages. You still want to have that like number 6, or if you want to have a beer in the courtyard, by a fire pit as 5, or you're bringing your relatives to go shopping in number 4. These are all places where you can spend time and hang out. So number 1, not surprisingly, number 1 is, people are very drawn to number 1. Number 7 is very similar to this kind of meadow concept, open space, conservation. While it might not be very popular, I think one thing we're going to have to do is think creatively of how you activate the green space, the bigger greenway, but also preserve it and preserve its natural amenities, make sure it's healthy stream, healthy corridor. But we do know access to nature is critical and really a driving factor. As you can see, number 3, number 6, these are public spaces where people can engage, open lawns, throw the baseball, let's have a concert. These are things that people are drawn to. And you can go to that concert by walking out your front door, or by walking down the street, or by riding your bike. These are great ideas and amenities. So thank you very much. These are great thoughts, and thank you for the voting. I'm going to go finally to the next one.
Andrew, I just there were a couple of comments on here about, one was about eco-architecture, and another one about that one of these options may underutilize the commercial economic development potential of this node. I don't know if any of those would be worth any more discussion.
Yeah, well, let's talk about eco-architecture, right? So I think 2 things we have going on. So we have, character areas near each other, right? So as we think about how you long-term viability of both of these areas, we've got to think about what is the identity for this corridor, what wants to happen here. we certainly don't want to discount the commercial economic development. So that's really what those walls are for. That's what the mixed use retail and those commercial opportunities are for. That's what is really driving that, strengthening that wall along the major corridor there, and bringing that to the attention. So I want to make sure we're clear about that. So thank you for that comment, and I want to make sure we clarify that. But also, eco-architecture, great opportunity. I think it's a way, as you introduce new office space, new residential space, these are ways that just can distinguish yourself and draw different residents and users who desire that type of space. Remember, you're right next to the greenway. So that linkage between eco-architecture, ecology, natural systems is very important. So yeah, like number 3 as Lauren has on there. But certainly want to make sure that, for this to be successful, it's got to have a healthy mix of commercial. We want to make sure we take advantage of that because it is a major corridor, a major area. So we can go to the final one now in terms of streetscapes. And so Lauren's going to bring in the, as we talk about this, again, similar to what we've seen before, try to give you some different ideas and concepts, everything from number 2, does it feel like where you can get in your golf cart and drive from your residential area into downtown? Maybe so. Number 6 is something we really liked before, that really good scale. Number 9 has again, I think it goes back to eco-architecture. It goes back to kind of how you design the image of Serenbe, but that kind of concept where you have a really nice blend between building and street. Number 8 is, do you have interior court spaces with your more kind of brownstone residential areas where people take advantage of these unique spaces interior to the development, not necessarily public spaces. And again, number 1, as you've seen before, places to eat, shop, restaurants, things like that. Number 4 is really highlighting that bike and ped commercial activity. And 8 and 9, really drive into that, and obviously understandable, very nice, very attractive. And so I think when we think about residential, especially when we have these pockets of whether it's, we talked about this earlier in the concepts, where you have these kind of out parcels of residential areas kind of linking around the greenway, you're also going to want to have these kind of communal spaces where people can gather and that are for them, that it's for that community really feeling, that kind of feel. And that's certainly very viable. Number 6 obviously retains popularity, has a good balance between the road and the building. So that's really good as well. When you look at 9, the difference between 6 and 9, things that to look apart, 9 has a little more of a local road feel, right? Commercial hamlet. Number 6 is a little more kind of that major core, maybe that's the parkway feel, right? On the interior of the corridor. But 9's a little more, it might be a main road, but it's 2 lanes. There's no buffers. It's people are moving across the street. It has a softer edge to it. We always want to be able to define and articulate what's happening here and what's going on. And so when we think about this architecture of the streetscape, what we want to think about, to the comment about the challenge of, how do you, the retail. The retail is really meant for the community. We create that special space there. When you create these spaces, you're creating a destination. Applying to the residents who live in that area. I think certainly we're going to look at how to make sure that these are successful. So, thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Eric.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And so we really do appreciate everyone's input over the last hour or so. What we're going to be doing over the course of today and into the evening. Well, first off, in tonight's session, we're going to be presenting you some more refined sketches and diagrams and how to prioritize some of these ideas and ultimately come up with a framework and strategy for the plan. And likewise, as I've mentioned a couple of times, a loop into how this potentially ties into the comprehensive plan as a whole. So over the next afternoon, myself and the rest of our team, we're going to be working hard on taking all this input we received from you at both these nodes and drafting some ideas. So when we come back this evening, for those of you who will be on that session, you're going to see some of your ideas reflected. What you'll see will be very much a work in progress. I don't want to suggest it's the final plan, but it's the idea is that we'll keep kind of pushing the ball forward a little bit, and we'll use this evening to get some additional and more specific feedback from everyone on some of the ideas as we draw them out. I think on the next slide, I think we have effectively kind of a box for Q&A. Yeah, so within the Pigeonhole app, there's also a final box where you could write down any questions you have. We don't necessarily need to use that. People can just chime in if they want via the speakers, but the Pigeonhole also gives you the ability to type it out, and people can upvote questions that you may have written as well. So if anyone wants to sort of anonymously ask a question, they would have the ability to use that. And I've noticed some things going on in the chat box also that I'll address before just opening it up. You know, we see a couple of comments about, you know, just the idea of particularly at the 400 node that Michael mentioned earlier about, you know, the concern about underutilizing the commercial potential of that node. And then likewise, the success rate of retail not being very high along the corridor. I think, you know, from my perspective, and I'll let others from our team chime in, and would love to hear from others in the community as well. You know, I think there's a few things that we're thinking of when we're presenting some of these ideas to you. One is that a lot of the area right there at the Big Creek itself, that's land that we really can't develop anyways. It's not developable land. A lot of it's protected. So a lot of what we're suggesting or asking about is, okay, how do we use that, and how do we leverage that, and how do we capitalize on it? I think on the other side, in terms of retail not having a very strong success rate, I think some of that, you know, our hope and intention would be that some of that can be addressed by creating communities around that retail that can help support it. I mean, that's sort of the fundamental idea and theory behind mixing uses already, especially when you mix retail in, is that you're creating a community that can help support those businesses. You know, obviously I'm just kind of talking very high level in that, but I think that's, you know, broadly something that, you know, we're thinking about when we suggest that, you know, there could be retail options at these locations. But I'll turn it over to everyone else to if they have any questions or thoughts, or, you know, would like to sort of weigh in on any of these matters that we've discussed over the last hour or so.
This is Denise. So you all had asked, I do kind of see this area as being a little more intensive than, say, the Route 9 and Holcomb Bridge Road. And that's what I'm saying. It needs to be somewhere between, not quite town square, but not quite urban Atlanta either. So there's a little bit more flexibility for a little bit more intensity, but not super, super big town, downtown look. Also, I kind of want to go back to the Route 9 and Holcomb Bridge. And thank you for defining the area. I think that's really, really important that we really understand what we're talking about, since we're already built out so much and we are always colliding. These character areas are colliding with one another. And I just wanted to point out too that the retrofitted development shopping center where Marshall's is now, to me, one of the big success stories there is that Los Hermanos relocated from the Skillet and seems to be thriving there. And especially as we're moving down 9, I think we have to figure out a way to preserve, particularly there's a lot of Latino small businesses, and they certainly add so much to the community. So how do we preserve their viability and maybe help them with their facades? And it's funny because I went into Los Hermanos, and it's almost like, from the outside it looks different, but from the inside it looks almost exactly like the same store that was at the Skillet, which is kind of an interesting experience. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. One thing we've heard a little bit, we saw it in our other surveys, and it was also mentioned on the chat box, was Avalon as sort of an example. How does the group feel about that at the 400 node? Is that really a model that people look to? Does everyone sort of agree with that, or are there other thoughts out there? Is that
Uh, this is Richard Arena. Let me give other thoughts.
sure?
Uh, I guess I have some concern that since the pandemic, there've been a lot of changes, maybe accelerated some trends. For example, telemarketing. Uh, how much of the workforce is going to continue to work from home? There's some research that says that a lot of people will remain from home because both employers and employees find it beneficial. Also, the rise in e-commerce, which has gone up dramatically. It's been rising over the years and hurting brick and mortar retail, but it's taken a sharp increase during this time. Also, another trend of urban flight. The pandemic has accelerated that trend. So I'm wondering, are we really thinking about these things and the impact on our plans and the things that maybe we started thinking about when this began, and then the pandemic has come along and accelerated those trends? Are we really in tune with what's happening? Just a question, open question.
I think that's an excellent point. This is Trent Perry. The east side of Roswell has suffered a great long time through not being able to have their retail businesses along the Holcomb Bridge corridor, supported by the dense residential population, including large subdivisions, for years. It's a commuter thoroughfare. People work outside of the city by and large, and do most of their shopping, retail and service businesses outside of the area of Roswell. I think to not take advantage of this significant potential economic growth area with more commercial and less dense residential, and to try to infill with retail is not necessarily the best approach. I think you need, not on the scale of Avalon, because I think we're past that in terms of residential density in this area. I think we have to retrofit businesses and commercial enterprises, office in particular, and perhaps some innovative livable centers, initiative concepts, perhaps in the southeast area, in order to make this a more vibrant economic source for the city of Roswell. Right now, I think it's the most underutilized piece of real estate in the entire city. With the expansion of the mobility of Georgia DOT, with the improvements of the 400 interchange, I think the city has a tremendous opportunity to grow this area from a retrofitting standpoint. I don't think it can be completely redeveloped, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring a lot of jobs into Roswell, and likewise commercial tax revenues, instead of relying completely on residential property taxes the way we do at probably a 70% rate or so. I think we have the ability to put something in not only the northwest quadrant, but also the extensive HB Old Alabama quadrant, and then beyond that into the Centennial and the Nesbitt Ferry nodes, to create a more vibrant economic picture for the entire city of Roswell. 40% of the population of the city resides on the east side, and it only has about 20% of the businesses, because they have a hard time surviving with an extensive commuter traffic through the corridor without improvements to the entire Holcomb Bridge infrastructure to promote shopping locally. To add more retail and heavily multifamily without planning for economic growth from commercial enterprises is not the way to do. I think this interchange, we have one shot at it right now in the near term, and we need to take advantage of it in a more effective way than what your present planning process seems to provide for, especially in the northwest quadrant.
This is Claire Snedeker. I wanted to add that I think when I think of Avalon, I think of it as being too dependent on retail and not enough on maybe mirroring what Trent said. I would like to see something like a medical campus or a tech campus, something that really is more service-oriented office space rather than obviously the traditional office space, which the model's so changing on. And again, our last comp plan had the other side of 400, the node being the highest economic benefit to the city. And I think the scale of what I was seeing in the options to choose from didn't look like a scale closest to 400 that was high enough on the economic development scale to provide the benefit that we really need to bring. One of the things that happens is if you don't put it where it's going to be the most concentrated with the traffic, the mobility access and all that, is you tend to start spraying the development into our areas that we want more to be city center or green space, suburban residential areas. So I'd love to see the concentration there that the mobility demand, provides for.
I have a question. This is Lavanya Henderson, and this is specifically about the east side of Roswell. Just listening to the earlier comments about the high number of commuters leaving Roswell, going elsewhere to work and so forth. In the evenings, on the weekends, where are many of the residents, in you guys' opinion, spending their times in terms of entertainment and food? Because one of the things I've noticed in the pandemic as well is still, a significant number of people frequenting Canton Street and other restaurants, whether that's takeout or dine-in. And I was just curious, outside of work, when these commuters are coming back to the east side of Roswell, where do you see them spending their money? Because I think that might be another opportunity for the other side as well, as we can capture that evening time experience and weekend experience as well. So is there any feedback on that?
Hi, yeah, I live in Roswell. I'm a millennial IT project manager, working out here. The things that my friends and I most like, we love the local restaurant scene in Roswell. I think as we're planning this, my hesitation towards something, not necessarily like the format of Avalon, but maybe the contents of Avalon, is it feels a little, maybe I'll say cookie cutter, a little bit more commercial. What we really like about Roswell is that the restaurants are local, things feel local. Roswell has like its own look and feel, and when you're in Roswell versus when you're in another city, because some of the other cities really just kind of look like each other, but Roswell still feels like a community. And what we do, we like the green spaces, we like the local restaurants, and for a time the Gaslight isn't there anymore on Canton Street, but we like to go to like the comedy stand-up shows and things like that, and that's what a lot of my friends like to do. That's kind of how we like to spend our evenings.
Thank you.
I think too, on the east side, and we're talking right, and I think on the east side, there's about 40,000 residents on the east side, and a good portion of those residents live in some very, very well-established, high-end, traditional suburban planned subdivisions. And so the income potential or the household income is significantly higher than around the adjoining area. But the problem has been, and I've lived on the east side for 33 years in one of those large subdivisions, the problem, based on my research and a lot of research that some friends and I have done, or associates and I have done, is that the willingness to shop on the East Holcomb Bridge, businesses on the East Holcomb Bridge corridor, is a very negative experience. The Holcomb Bridge corridor lacks sidewalks, it lacks mobility, it lacks accessibility. It's ugly, and it needs a tremendous amount of upgrade in order to be more appealing. For example, on the west side of Holcomb Bridge and Crossville Road, with the more townhome types of, or the better aesthetics and landscaping and shoppability appeal than the east side. The east side is run down, and until that's addressed, I think we're going to continue to suffer in all of the shopping centers that front on the east side, on east side's Holcomb Bridge Road corridor. And that's the thing that bothers me the most about the scale of this development that we've just listened to in the northwest corner, when we have such a tremendous opportunity for this area to be developed in a way that will not only promote more localized shopping and office and jobs opportunity in the in the interchange, but also perhaps be catalytic to the further east side development and improvement and shoppability of the Holcomb Bridge corridor. If you take a look also at the types of businesses that Roswell has, I think the total number of businesses that the entire city has is around 4,600 businesses. The vast majority, 92%, employ less than 20 people, and another 6% employ less than 50 people. So we are not a town or city of a lot of large employers that offer a lot of employment opportunities to people with college degrees at a higher income range. We need to change that. We need to bring some jobs here. We need to have types of businesses that provide jobs, whether it's the medical industry or the information technology industry or whatever, and take advantage of what we've got left as opportunity to put some of those types of office facilities and so forth that we see in Avalon in this area, this corridor we're talking about right now, and not lose the opportunity to low-scale development that's not going to really change our tax structure. Also, 30% or about 2,000 of the 5,000 or so businesses that we have in the city are home-based businesses, meaning they don't have offices. Temporary office facilities might work for those businesses, but they're home-based businesses, very small businesses, of which many have probably suffered as a result of the pandemic. We have to take a very close look at what we're doing now on the east side, and I have a great passion for trying to see the east side grow, again, having lived there for 33 years. I think we need to be very careful how we address this component in our comprehensive plan for 2040.
All right, thank you. Well, it is 1 o'clock, and we got quite a bit of work to do. I hate to stifle good conversation, but we do have a lot of work to do to make sure we're ready for this evening. So we want to thank everyone for being a part of this and providing their input. Obviously, through the pigeonhole and this conversation we've had in the last few moments, we've got a lot to think through and work through. So we'll keep on the conversation this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.